All right. Remember this story from a couple of weeks ago about the pastor who was robbed for $1 million in jewelry?
A Brooklyn bishop was robbed at gunpoint in the middle of his Sunday sermon today, and it was all caught on camera.
All right. So in this story, a lot of people were saying, hey, this was an insurance fraud. The pastor scammed everybody, right? It's obvious. It's obvious. Who wears $1 million worth of jewelry with no security, right? This was a setup. Nate, you should just say it. And it's funny because there were a lot of commentators who essentially just said, hey, this was a setup. The pastor, he is a bad guy, and he essentially set up the robbery. That was the narrative going out there. But now we absolutely know that narrative is likely, or probably, or maybe even just straight up false. They've now caught the people who did rob this pastor. And let's just call it what it is. There are a lot of people who I think got to eat crow from this story, because a lot of people just assume that this pastor was in on it, and it seems like he was not. Let's check it out. So 2 suspects are now in custody in connection with the robbery of the bishop in Brooklyn. Now, just a quick recap of the story. Bishop on a Sunday was doing his thing, had the congregation. Some men come up, robbed them at gunpoint, took $1 million worth of jewelry off of him and his family, and then got away. That essentially was the initial story that came up. And then people were kind of shocked at 2 things. Number 1, the amount of jewelry that this guy had. And number 2, the fact that there was no security. So people came to the conclusion that this may be an inside job where the pastor needed some extra cash. So he set up a robbery. The thieves take the jewelry. He files the insurance claim, and he'll get the money back. But none of that is actually true or accurate. That just seems to be the narrative that was being played out for this case. On Wednesday, police announced the arrest of 23-year-old Jawan Anderson and 23-year-old Shay Quan Pollock on federal robbery, conspiracy, and firearm charges. Now, it's interesting because the pastor in this case, his name was dragged through everything. And you can tell he was a little annoyed by it, but vindication is great. Here he is telling everyone how he feels about being vindicated in this story, that he wasn't the villain. Check it out.
I'm hoping that this clears a lot of things up with my name, as far as, the world believing that I'm a villain instead of a victim. And it hurts.
Now, the NYPD said this became a federal case because there was no regard for anybody in the middle of mass and holding a child at gunpoint. It's a pretty rough robbery. And that's why the NYPD says this became a federal case under the Hobbs Act. Okay, so what is the Hobbs Act? Well, the Hobbs Act is part of, let's say, a RICO type charge. It's designed for criminal organizations like the mob. When they commit robberies and extortion, that allows the federal government to kind of step in and say, hey, you guys who are part of this criminal enterprise, we can charge you under the Hobbs Act with, let's say, even RICO violations. But even RICO is not required under the Hobbs Act. If you're a criminal organization and you guys are committing robberies and extortion, then the Hobbs Act can grab you up. Now, your first question would be, well, doesn't seem like organized crime. Well, the NYPD thinks that this was a robbery team. So they did have allegedly a criminal organization, and that criminal organization was to do these high-profile robberies. So that's kind of how they were able to entrap them under the Hobbs Act. So if you just had, like, say, one person go in and commit this robbery, you wouldn't have a Hobbs Act violation. But now, since you have this group and this is what they do, it seems like the government can prove that this is what they do. Their organizational goal is to rob people. Then the government can charge them under the Hobbs Act, and that's what the NYPD is saying here.
Very, very violent robbery crew that we saw, with no regard to anybody, going in the middle of mass, holding a child at gunpoint. That's a pretty rough robbery.
And that's why the NYPD says it became a federal case under the Hobbs Act.
We get a 10-year minimum on a robbery with a firearm.
So they can actually get a minimum of 10 years if they're convicted of committing robberies as this organization under the Hobbs Act. So now the 2 suspects have pleaded not guilty, and a third man is being sought in connection with the robbery. And the $1 million worth of jewelry has still not yet been discovered. I might even have to eat some crow, because I was believing that maybe this guy had something to do with it, especially when everybody made the sense of, hey, he had no security, you got $1 million worth of jewelry, and there's insurance on the jewelry. It seemed to ring all the bells like, hey, this is very, very suspect. But now we know it's not. There was a professional team that did this, and now the government's charging them under the RICO statute. So let me know how you feel about this story. Do you believe that the bishop had nothing to do with it? Do you believe that there may be more to it? You know, it's so fascinating because I think as commentators, you know, we want to kind of put things together and see the pattern and see the puzzle for what we think it is. But I think in this case, a lot of people just made assumptions based on the evidence that they had, and those assumptions happen to be wrong. But hopefully we will be better. Hopefully I will be better. Let me know what you feel in the comment section. My name is Nate the Lawyer, and I'll see you next time. Peace.